Classic American muscle cars are more than antique vehicles. They represent the power, speed, and flair that characterized a whole era. Today, some of these cars fetch millions of dollars at auctions. I mean, as you'll see, some of these numbers are truly mind-boggling. From the iconic 1962 Shelby Cobra to the rare 1971 Hemi Cuda Convertible, these are some of the most expensive muscle cars ever sold at auction. Number 15. The 1969 Dodge Hemi Daytona. So, what do you think is the number we start with? Over or under $1 million? Well, an exceptionally rare 1969 Dodge Hemi Daytona sold for an amazing $1.3 million at a Mecum auction in 2022, which took place in Indianapolis. This was the first time a Daytona had sold for 7 figures. Calling this car rare is an understatement. The winged '69 Daytona, the most optioned Charger Daytona known to humanity, had some pretty cool things: power steering, N85 tick-tock tack, P31 tinted power windows, N51 max cooling package, C6G green vinyl bucket seats with C55 headrests, A01 light groups, S81 wood grain steering wheel, G33 remote left-hand mirror, R22 AM8 track radio, and C62 6-way adjustable driver's seat are among the performance upgrades on this vehicle. What a mouthful, right? Let's see what's next. Number 14. The 1965 Shelby Cobra Roadster CSX. Listen to this. The 1965 Shelby Cobra Roadster CSX was initially created in the United Kingdom. In September 1961, Ford Motor Company's Carroll Shelby requested that AC Motors build a chassis to take a V8 engine, as Ford desired a car that could compete with the Corvette. The 3.6-liter lightweight thin-wall cast small block engine, designed at the Windsor Engine Factory, had several changes before it was ready, including front-end bodywork with the steering box and stronger rear outboard brakes to decrease cost and withstand power. But finally, in 1962, the small block engine was upgraded to 4.3 liters, and road testing of this beast of a car commenced. The Roadster sold for $1.59 million at Barrett-Jackson's Scottsdale auction in 2015. Still not as expensive as the next car. Number 13. The 1970 Dodge Hemi Challenger RT Convertible. Finding a Hemi Challenger convertible now is unusual, especially because Dodge only made 9 of them in 1970. The story about this car's first public ride is quite something. It was sold with a large discount to the car dealer's friend. Since they were playing their monthly game of checkers, during which they happened to make a deal, in exchange for the large discount, the customer, an anesthesiologist named Langford Palmer, agreed to the dealer's one condition: he would race it on the street. It was a win-win situation. Palmer and his Challenger had an untouchable reputation, while the Dodge dealer's sales skyrocketed. Today, the car remains with factory settings and is expertly detailed, just as Roger Gibson insisted on when he first undertook its restoration. The car was sold in an auction for $1.65 million. The car is sold in what Mecum refers to as their "the bid goes on" process. Okay, we're slowly but surely getting up there with these numbers. Number 12. 1967 Shelby GT500 Super Snake. The world's only 1967 GT500 Super Snake found a new home half a decade ago, selling for $2.2 million at a Mecum auction in Kissimmee, Florida. Aside from its uniqueness, the car has received a lot of noteworthy distinctions. Carroll Shelby's wild brainchild came to fruition when he was asked to participate in a Goodyear tire advertising event. It was agreed that a supercar that could outperform everything else on the globe would be employed for the task. Shelby took an existing GT500 and installed a Ford GT engine into its engine bay, virtually the same powertrain utilized in the GT40 Mark II that won Le Mans a year before that. The engine was described as the mother of all 427s at that time. Aluminum heads, aluminum water pump, forged crank, Le Mans rods, just practically everything inside the engine was intended to run at 6,000 RPM to compete at Le Mans. The end product was a 520 horsepower GT500. Despite initial plans to create 50 more copies of the car for the public following the test, The 427-powered GT500 Snake proved too expensive to manufacture, with an anticipated retail price that was almost double from its competitors. This work of art was sold after the test in 1967 for $5,000 and has barely traveled 26 miles since. I mean, just wow. The same can be said about this next car. Number 11, the 1971 Hemi Cuda Convertible. The iconic 1971 Hemi Cuda Convertible was one of just 11 built for that model year and sold for $2.2 million in 2007 at a Barrett-Jackson auction. While that may seem like a big price, it was actually $1 million or $2 million less than what would normally be expected for a well-preserved 1971 Hemi Cuda Convertible. While perfect in practically every manner, this vehicle had one big flaw. The engine was not the original one placed on the manufacturing line. It did, however, have the correct 1971 Chrysler 426 Hemi fitted, resulting in the highest sum paid for a non-matching numbers muscle vehicle. Speaking of Hemis, number 10, the 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda Convertible. Convertibles were less popular in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Therefore, the 1970 and 1971 Cuda convertibles were quite unusual. This particular beast was one of only 14 built for the 1970 model year, and one of 9 equipped with the Hemi A727 Torque Flight 3-speed automatic gearbox and a dual-quad 426 HP Hemi V8 engine. Fun fact, at just 27 years old, John Hurlitz, one of the key persons responsible for this car's appearance, leased it on his corporate account. The one-of-a-kind muscle car passed through several owners, including Brett Torino and Darrell Davis, who was the chairman of Chrysler Finance. Cummins Restorations restored the wonderful piece of Mopar history to its original beauty in 2002, before selling it for an amazing $2.25 million at Mica Monterey in 2015. Let us go now from the 70s to the 50s. Number 9. The 1954 Pontiac Bonneville Special Motorama concept car. In the early 1950s, General Motors badly sought to portray the Pontiac as an exciting brand to lure a younger clientele to their showrooms. Harley Earl, supposedly inspired by the automobiles fighting for speed records on Utah's Bonneville Salt Flats, charged designers Homer Lagasse and Paul Gilland with creating a car worthy of the Bonneville moniker, one that could compete with the rival Chevrolet Corvette. The result was the Pontiac Bonneville Special Concept. Only 2 were ever produced. The Pontiac Bonneville Special Concept, similar to the production Chevrolet Corvette on which it was based, was a low-slung sports vehicle with a fiberglass body. Unlike the original Corvette, the Pontiac concept featured an enclosed bubble cockpit with flip-up side windows, as well as a V8 engine under its long hood. Although the 4-speed hydromatic transmission was Pontiac's most powerful engine to date, the 230-horsepower, 268-cubic-inch 8-cylinder was never sold. It fetched $3.08 million at Barrett-Jackson's 35th anniversary auction in Scottsdale in 2006. We've passed $3 million, and we aren't even halfway there. Let's move on to the next car. Number 8. The 1967 L88 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray Convertible. The Chevrolet Corvette is one of the most iconic American muscle vehicles, and most of you already know about it. The car's famous Stingray style and tremendous performance have helped it maintain its value throughout the years. But few Corvettes have ever cost as much as this 1967 L88. This L88 was one of 20 produced that year. Chevrolet kept the L88 a secret, not advertising it to the general public or dealers. The majority of those models were sold allegedly to race teams, which is understandable given the engine's 430 horsepower rating. Its black-on-red paint exterior has been professionally repaired, the fuel warning placard remains attached to the center console, and it is powered by the formidable Rock Crusher 4-speed manual transmission. The staggering price for this car at auction was $3.2 million. But up next, we have a car that we already mentioned, but don't be fooled, it's not the same. Number 7. The 1971 Plymouth Hemi Cuda Convertible. This 1971 convertible was identical in looks to the 71 Cuda convertible that sold for $2.2 million. But this one is especially nicely prized, since it is the sole surviving convertible with its original matching number parts. It still has the original Hemi 426 V8 engine, and is the only Hemi Cuda with a 4-speed manual transmission and Hurst shifter. Only 11 were made worldwide, and 1971 also saw the lowest number of Hemi convertibles ever produced. This Cuda, nicknamed the Holy Grail of muscle cars, is powered by a 440 Ci Hemi with a 6-barrel carburetor, as well as updated suspension and reinforcements. Its first known owner was Russ Meyer, a well-known cartoonist from the Southwest. Meyer sold it to a man in Oregon for $250,000, but it was subsequently confiscated during a narcotics investigation and auctioned for $405,000. Julius Stewart later restored the car to its former glory, including the original B5 bright blue color scheme with blue paint, black top, and matching blue seats. It sold for $3.5 million at the 2014 Seattle Mecum car auction, making it the most expensive Chrysler ever sold. Speaking of beauties sold at the Mecum car auction, number 6, the 1968 Ford Mustang GT390 Bullitt. A 1968 Ford Mustang GT has had a long and winding trip. The automobile you first saw slam dancing around the streets of San Francisco was one of 2 Highland Green fastbacks bought by Warner Brothers for use in the detective film Bullitt, starring car-obsessed actor Steve McQueen. After filming the movie, the legendary Mustang was sold to Warner Brothers employee Robert Ross, who kept it for several years with an actual detective until going into hiding with its 4th owner, Robert Kiernan, in New Jersey in 1974. It resurfaced unexpectedly decades later, brought out by Ford at the 2018 Detroit Car Show, and its meteoric climb did not stop there. This beauty just sold at Mecum auctions for the highest sum ever paid for a Mustang at a public auction. The fact that the Bullitt Mustang was sold at all is almost as impressive as its $3.74 million price tag. Mr. Kiernan, the car's long-standing owner, had spent years fighting off requests to buy it, even from Steve McQueen himself. In the late 1970s, McQueen, who bonded with the car during the filming of the movie, was keen to get the 390 Ci V8 powered pony car, but was unable to do so. In a letter, McQueen practically begged Kiernan to sell him the Bullitt Mustang, even promising to replace it with another copy. It all came to nothing. Kiernan wasn't selling it. But what price did the next car sell at? Number 5. The 1967 Chevrolet Corvette L88S. Even if this L88 lacks a proven race time compared to its convertible counterpart, it remains one of the most sought-after Corvettes ever produced. This was the only L88 Corvette with a matching red-on-red paint scheme among the 20 built in 1967. This car was outfitted with a heavy-duty suspension, a 430 horsepower engine, and a gearbox optimized for maximum quarter-mile performance. Despite the huge price tag it had, this car had close to no comfort, no radio, heating, or air conditioning. Its engine is also purposefully undervalued, with independent testing indicating that it produces more than 560 horsepower. With the support of the National Corvette Restorers Society, the automobile was able to surpass the sales record set by its convertible counterpart. Though both vehicles received regional NCRS Top Flight Awards, this vehicle outperformed the convertible by receiving a National Top Flight Award, as well as the Duntov Mark of Excellence Award. It was sold to a very rich customer at the Barrett-Jackson Scottsdale auction in 2014 for a whopping $3.85 million. Crazy, right? Well, now we're going to see some even crazier prices. Number 4. 1966 Shelby Cobra 427 Super Snake. It's easy to see why some regard the 427 Super Snake as the greatest Cobra. The standard 427 cubic inch V8, which is already a little too powerful for the chassis, is paired with not one, but 2 Paxton supercharges in Super Snake configuration. We're sure this monster is a handful behind the wheel. It also appears to be menacing. This CSX 3015 is essentially the rarest Cobra in existence, since it is one of just 2 Super Snakes ever produced, and the only one still alive. It produces over 1,000 horsepower from its dual supercharged 427 V8. Carroll Shelby developed this monster for himself to see how fast it could go. This car underwent extensive testing, including a comparison to other competition Cobras, and was judged to be a complete competition roadster, preserving its original body with its aluminum Super Snake hood. The car still retains its 427 competition 377 rear end, its original rear end oil cooler and pumps, and amazingly, its original 1965 date-coded engine block 5M17, December 17, 1965. It still has its original heads and chrome side pipes. The CSX 3015 is regarded as a period original, in that it was renewed rather than restored. It's no surprise that this baby sold for $5.115 million at the Barrett-Jackson auction in Scottsdale, Arizona. But now we're entering the top 3. And disclaimer, the numbers are getting even bigger. Number 3. The 1964 Ford GT40 prototype. This GT40 was Henry Ford's first Le Mans entry, and it was piloted by Bruce McLaren, Bob Bondurant, Phil Hill, and Chris Amon. It was raced in period at Le Mans, Sebring, Daytona, Nassau, and Monza. It's even rumored to be the first GT40 sent to Shelby American for development. The fundamental concept has a lightweight steel monocoque chassis with twin A-arm suspension. Its all-aluminum 4.2-liter engine is paired with a Colati gearbox to manage 350 horsepower. Ford displayed this unique jewel at the Detroit Auto Show for several years, until Paul Lanzante restored it in 2010 and sold it for $7 million at the Houston auction in 2014. Yet again, the Mecum auction had a gem. Number 2. The 1965 Shelby Daytona Cobra Coupe. More than a decade ago at Mecum auction in Monterey, a 1965 Shelby Daytona Cobra Coupe was sold for a record $7.25 million. The Daytona, one of 6 such race vehicles hand-built by Carroll Shelby and his team, set the auction record for the most expensive American car ever sold at the time. Bob Bondurant drove the Daytona CSX 2601 to victory in the GT class of the World Manufacturers' Championship in 1965, defeating the previous champion, Ferrari. He was also on hand to drive the vehicle across the auction block. The legacy of its World Manufacturers' Championship win stays in history books more than 4 decades later, reminding us of one of the proudest moments in U.S. race history and a competitive spirit of victory against all odds. The Daytona Cobra Coupe was also licensed for the road, but at one point the CSX 2601 car was owned by a North Dakota businessman who, perhaps appropriately, controlled a chain of petrol stations. He used the car to make the daily 300-mile journey to collect receipts. And now last, but definitely not least. Quite the opposite, actually. Number 1. The 1962 Shelby Cobra CSX 2000. The Shelby Cobra. It has a long and distinguished history among American muscle cars. Many muscle car enthusiasts dream of having a classic Shelby Cobra, which has an iconic design and high-powered performance. Any original is going to be quite valuable, but the first Cobra is far more expensive than any other. At an auction in Monterey, California, chassis number CSX 2000 sold for a record $13.75 million, with a final price of $12.5 million plus auction costs. This particular Cobra is far more extraordinary than simply being the first one built by Carroll Shelby and his team. It was painted in various colors throughout its first year of life and shipped from event to event to make it appear as if manufacturing had officially begun. It didn't, yet the tactic worked. Not only that, but it finally ended up the brilliant shade of blue you see today, and it's impressively never been restored. It is very observable with dents and dings throughout the body and mismatched paint colors hiding in layers all over the chassis. Despite these faults, it became the most expensive American classic muscle car ever sold. Call it what you will, but I call it character and personality. That's what this car has in loads in those dents. As these cars are auctioned and admired, they remind us why they're still loved today. Each one, from the Shelby Cobra to the Hemi Cuda, carries a story of American creativity and passion. These cars inspire car fans worldwide and show why their legacy will live on for years to come. So, did we miss any of these auctions? Let us know in the comments below.